Today we're going to take a look at the conferences in 2024. There was a lot that went on this past offseason. Right at the end of the season, I couldn't remember what all took place, so we're going to make a video talking about all the Power 5 conferences, which I guess now is Power 4. I don't really know what they're going to call it, but we're going to dive right in. First thing we're going to look at is the Pac-2, Pac-12, what do you want to call it? I don't know. All it is Oregon State and Washington State right now, and all that they're getting, they're obviously going to play each other. They're going to play 3 home games against the Mountain West and 3 away games against the Mountain West. Not going to be up for the championship or anything like that, but that's the Pac-2 at the moment. Basically, Oregon State and Washington State are the odd man out. Every other team got an invite to another conference, even if it makes absolutely zero sense what conference they're in. But 2 teams that got left out, obviously Oregon State, Washington State, kind of a part of Mountain West, kind of independent. Now we're going to look at the Big 12, which is probably one of the most competitive and probably going to be one of the most fun conferences to watch. Not just an elite team, but a ton of really good teams, really good programs. And I really like the geographic footprint of it. So the Big 12 is actually 16 total teams. They had to scoop up 8 teams in the past 2 years. Obviously with Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC, that really started these dominoes to fall. But the 4 teams that they got this year, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. So you're thinking about those 4 programs that are coming into the Big 12. Arizona just lost Jedd Fisch, but they were a really good team this past year, beat OU in the bowl game, and then you got Arizona State, a program that's got some tradition. They've been pretty good in the past. Colorado, obviously with Coach Prime coming into the conference, is going to bring a lot of attention. And then Utah is kind of an interesting one, probably going to be odds-on favorite to win the Big 12 this next year. Didn't win the Pac-12 this past year, but they won it the 2 previous years. Really solid program for Kyle Whittingham and what they do at Utah. Obviously, it's still weird that UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU are in the Big 12, but right there, those guys are kind of the old heads compared to these guys that are coming in this next year. So a lot of different things going on, and all of the conferences are going to no division for their championship game, so Big 12 is no exception. The top 2 teams in the standings overall, and if there's a tie, they're going to just go by, I'm sure, highest ratings in the playoffs. But the biggest distance that anybody's going to have to travel is West Virginia to Arizona, and that's going to be 2,000 miles, so pretty substantial, but not nearly what some of these other conferences are going to have to do as far as travel. So Big 12, 16 teams, some pretty good programs coming in the door. Going to be a really entertaining conference. Next conference is the ACC. And with the ACC, they haven't lost anybody yet. Of course, we've heard Florida State, Clemson, a few of them with some rumblings about possibly leaving for Big 10, ACC, whoever will take them. But right now, the ACC is at 17 teams. And the teams that they added are Stanford, Cal, and SMU. So nothing really says Atlantic Coast Conference like California and Stanford. So right there, literally have to travel across the country and some really long road trips possibly. You got Boston College to Cal, which is 3.1 thousand miles, so all the way across the country to play a conference game. So that's absolutely stupid, but it is what it is in today's college football. And then apparently their entire athletic department, so that's absolutely insane. But not just great football programs with Cal and Stanford, pretty solid. And SMU obviously was a team that was fighting for that group of 5 spot in the New Year's 6. So a pretty good team right there out of the AAC with SMU and Rhett Lashley. They're going to be pretty formidable in there, but obviously they're going to have to recruit at that Power 5 level, which they haven't done yet. So right there, as far as the depth, I think it's going to be an issue for them. But still some good programs, up-and-coming programs. You got Florida State, who got left out of the playoff. Clemson, who's historically, over the past about 10 years, been really good. I think Miami's up-and-coming program as well. Virginia Tech's up-and-coming. So some really good programs. Big conference against 17 teams that spans the entire United States. Might want to think about changing that name from the Atlantic Coast Conference whenever you have a couple teams in San Francisco in the conference. But anyway, that's the ACC this next year. Now you're going to start looking at the 2 really big conferences they know are going to be the most powerful conferences in this thing. So the Big 10 is 18 teams. That's a huge conference, the biggest conference out of any of them as far as members. The longest road trip's not quite as long as the ACC, but you'd have USC and Rutgers whenever they play. That's 2.7 thousand miles. So, again, stretching from coast to coast. You got New Jersey all the way down to Southern California and everywhere in between, really. So, to get to 18 teams, they're adding 4 this next year with Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, which were obviously the biggest 4 brands in the Pac-12. So, the USC obviously on their face a little bit this year as far as the football program. Historically been unbelievable. Washington obviously playing the national championship game. Oregon's going to be a top 5 team. UCLA with Chip Kelly, I think, is a little bit underrated with how they've been doing with their football program. So I think those are 4 really strong additions. And, of course, you got your Ohio States, you got Michigan, you got Penn State. Those have been the top 3. And the great thing about this conference that really stands out, which is great for these guys, is that they're not going to have divisions like they've had in the past. So you're not going to have an Iowa versus Michigan like they did this year in the championship game. It's going to be number 1 versus number 2, which it could be a rematch from Ohio State and Michigan just a week later, this time at a neutral site instead of at the Horseshoe or at the Big House. But anyway, the Big Ten is going to be extremely deep. And right there, we named off 6 teams that were really good. And we didn't even mention Wisconsin and Nebraska, the 2 of the most historic programs in the country. Whatever you want to say about Nebraska, I know they've been down for about 20 years. But as far as history and success in the past, they've had as much as anybody. So right there, Nebraska, whenever they get rolling, is going to be really fun to be a part of. I think Luke Fickell with Wisconsin is going to get those guys going as well. So unbelievably deep conference. Obviously, there are still a few cupcakes in there, but that conference as a whole is going to have, instead of 2 big dogs at the top and then Penn State kind of hanging around, they're going to have about 6, 7 legitimate contenders in the Big Ten this next year. Last conference to talk about is the SEC. Just to expand to 16 teams, which is the SEC and the Big 12 are the only teams that are at 16. Everybody else is a little bit over, with ACC at 17, Big 10 at 18. But all they're adding is Texas and now Oklahoma. 2 most historic programs out of the Big 12. They would be the top 2 programs in the Big 12. Obviously, Texas in the playoff. Oklahoma's been in the playoff multiple times and won tons of national championships, tons of Heisman trophies out of Oklahoma. So those are 2 huge pickups, not only in football, but you think about basketball, baseball, all those other sports where they're really good as well. So looking at the new SEC, you had 2 semifinals teams from this past year. Obviously, the Big Ten had both programs that were in the national championship, but looking at this roster of teams, it's absolutely stacked. You got Georgia, Texas, Alabama, LSU, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Auburn, Florida. I mean, these are historically programs that have been really good on the national stage. I'm sure you can see as far as the playoff, it's going to be mostly Big Ten and SEC teams. They're going to have some automatic bids if they want to get almost any of these conferences in with more than 1 or 2 teams. But this conference is absolutely loaded. And you're looking at the bottom, obviously you got Vandy down there. You got Arkansas, who has been up and down. They've had some good teams here pretty recently. South Carolina, which is going to be as athletic as anybody. It'd probably be a contender in the Big 12 or the ACC. They're going to be at the bottom of the conference, so extremely deep. It's going to be really hard to win at, but if you win 9, maybe 10 games, you're getting in the playoffs more than likely, and you're going to have a chance to win. I mean, it's just one of those things. They're going to have as much depth as anybody, especially at the high end with Georgia, Alabama, Texas, LSU. Those guys are going to have a ton of depth, and I think in the new playoff, depth is going to be one of the most key things in it. And I think one of those things, if you could find a way to get into the playoffs without having to play the extra game in the SEC championship, Big Ten championship, whatever it is, you might actually have an advantage just based off of injuries and depth. So it's one of those things to think about as far as the playoff. But SEC absolutely loaded, Big Ten absolutely loaded this next year, and they're probably going to take about 9, 10 of the playoff spots. So tons of changes in how the conferences are aligned and who's where. Tons of travel going to be had from coast to coast in a couple of these conferences, especially ACC and the Big Ten. But they're going to be some really good matchups. I think they really went top heavy with the Big Ten and the SEC. Big 12 is going to be fun, but it's not going to have a ton of top 15 programs. Neither is the ACC. Now, of course, Florida State, Clemson, Miami might have something to say about that, but the ACC may be a little bit top heavy, especially this year. Definitely looking forward to the next football season. It's going to be different. It's going to be fun to see a bunch of different matchups that we hadn't seen in the years past. See how Texas and Oklahoma do in the SEC. See how the Pac-12 teams do in the Big Ten. See if it's that much of a difference as far as style of play. So it's going to be a really interesting season. But I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you guys again in the next video.